It's us, your internet historians, and we have another episode here for you today. In today's episode, we will be discussing the history behind the movie The Current War. Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse, the greatest inventors of the industrial age, engage in a battle of technology and ideas that will determine whose electrical system will power the new century. Backed by J.P. Morgan, Edison dazzles the world by lighting Manhattan, but Westinghouse, aided by Nikola Tesla, sees fatal flaws in Edison's direct current design. Westinghouse and Tesla bet everything on risky and dangerous alternating current. So what do you guys think? Well, I mean, Lisa and I kind of were already talking about it before we started recording, but we were kind of a little confused the whole time. We were like, this stuff is going over our heads.
Yeah.
I think after I read like the Wikipedia about what the movie is about is when I actually started making sense to me on what was going on. So I'm like, okay, now I kind of like get it. But when I was watching it, I was just like, huh?
You know what was interesting was the guy who played Westinghouse had like a Southern accent, but that, yeah. What was his name? Shannon what?
Michael Shannon.
Yeah. But I looked up too, he's from like, I think Kentucky or something, but the actual guy, he's not from the South at all. So I was like, why did he have an accent?
I don't know. I feel like that's always how Michael Shannon is, and in all of his roles, it's like very him. I don't know. I think it's funny, especially with his look in this movie, with his
mustache
and sideburns and such.
Yeah. It was interesting. I also had a moment too where I was like, wait, I'm so used to like Benedict Cumberbatch, I think in so many different roles that I was like, wait, is he American in this? That's right. Thomas Edison is American.
Yeah.
I actually felt like Nikola Tesla's character didn't get enough shine.
No, not at all. I feel like that's kind of the overarching like opinion on this movie. Like for people that didn't like it, it seemed like their main complaint was that they didn't give Tesla enough credit for everything that he did, and they didn't really, which I was like thinking about it this morning, and yeah, they didn't really focus on Tesla until like the end of the movie. But then I was just like, it comes down to how we always feel about these historical movies, where it's just like the movie would be so long if they got into everything.
Or they need to make their own movie about him.
I was gonna say, too. They should just make a Nikola Tesla movie. But I like this movie. So yeah, I always talk about like the reception of the movie, because after I feel like I formed my opinion, I'm like, well, how did other people feel about it? Like, am I justified in feeling this way about this movie, or is that just me type of a thing? So I was like looking at it, and I don't know, people had issues with the editing and the music and stuff, and I don't know, I liked it. I thought it kept it entertaining because I was thinking about it, and like there's a lot, like kind of like what you're saying, where you didn't really know exactly what was going on, kind of. There's a lot of information in this, and some of it's kind of hard to grasp unless you have like any electrical knowledge at all. Yeah. So I feel like if they would have kept it more serious and with less, I don't know, creative editing and cinematography, I think it would have been really boring to watch. Like, at least it was like nice to look at, I guess.
So what was going on? What was the feud about, Alec? Or tell us about
first, let me set the scene first. Let's discuss who we're talking about here, because I mean, as we briefly mentioned, Edison and Westinghouse. Let me break down who these peeps are, the key players in this war of currents. I'm sure everyone's heard who Edison is, knows who Edison is, but
I have an idea, but
yeah.
I didn't know he was a freaking douchebag, but yeah.
We'll get into that too. So Thomas Alva Edison was an American inventor and businessman who has been described as America's greatest inventor. He developed many devices in fields such as electric power generation, mass communication, sound recording, and motion pictures. These inventions, which include the phonograph, the motion picture camera, and early versions of the electric light bulb, have had a widespread impact on the modern industrialized world. So key word there, that there's a misconception that Edison invented the light bulb. He did not invent the light bulb. He bought the patent for the light bulb and approved upon it, and actually made it a viable, like, commercial, light bulb to buy. So he actually just improved on someone else's patent. He didn't invent it. Edison was raised in the American Midwest. Early in his career, he worked as a telegraph operator, which inspired some of his earliest inventions. In 1876, he established his first laboratory facility in Menlo Park, New Jersey, which we see in the movie, where many of his inventions were developed. He later established a botanic laboratory in Fort Myers, Florida, in collaboration with businessmen Henry Ford and Harvey S. Firestone, which I thought was kind of interesting. A laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey, that featured the world's first film studio, the Black Maria. He was a prolific inventor, holding 1,093 U.S. patents in his name, as well as patents in other countries. I think they mentioned at the end of the movie that it was kind of a big deal that he held so many patents for things. And I wanted to double check this quote to see if this was actually true at all. But I liked how when he was interviewing Nikola Tesla, and he said that you have to come up with, so many minor inventions every couple weeks, and then like a major invention every 6 months. Like, that's just crazy. That's just like, come on, we're like spitting out these inventions. Like, this is what our job is. It makes sense, I guess, for the era, because there's so many. When you think about it, I mean, just the fact that there's not electricity in people's homes, there's so many problems daily, things that we take for granted at this point that they had to solve. Electricity. We want, I'm tired of these candles. It's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think about like refrigeration. How did they store food before they can
freaking down in the basement with their daily ice deliveries? It's crazy. So our other key player in this war of currents is George Westinghouse Jr. He was an American entrepreneur and engineer based in Pennsylvania, which is kind of what you're saying about his southern accent. He was from Pennsylvania, didn't make any sense. But anyway, he created the railway air brake and was a pioneer of the electrical industry, receiving his first patent at the age of 19. So when he was 19 years old, created his first invention, the rotary steam engine. He also devised the Westinghouse farm engine. At age 21, he invented a car replacer, which was a device to guide derailed railroad cars back onto the tracks, and a reversible frog, a device used with a railroad switch to guide trains onto one of two tracks. So he was very into trains, obviously. At about this time, he witnessed a train wreck where two engineers saw one another but were unable to stop their trains in time using the existing brakes. Brakemen had to run from car to car on catwalks atop the cars, applying the brakes manually on each car, which is very inefficient, it seems. In 1869, at age 22, Westinghouse invented a railroad braking system using compressed air. The Westinghouse system used a compressor on the locomotive, a reservoir, and a special valve on each car, and a single pipe running the length of the train with flexible connections, which both refilled the reservoirs and controlled the brakes, allowing the engineer to apply and release the brakes simultaneously on all cars. Our last guy that they kind of sort of briefly talk about is Nikola Tesla. He was a Serbian-American inventor, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, and futurist. I like how they gave him that title in the movie, the futurist. Best known for his contributions to the design of the modern alternating current, AC, electricity supply system. Born and raised in the Austrian Empire, Tesla studied engineering and physics in the 1870s without receiving a degree, gaining practical experience in the early 1880s working, I guess this is a field telephony, working in telephony at Continental Edison in the new electric power industry. In 1884, he immigrated to the United States, where he became a naturalized citizen. He worked for a short time at the Edison Machine Works in New York City before he struck out on his own, which they portray in the movie.
I just want to say one thing about George Westinghouse is that he also helped with the whole work week kind of invention.
Yeah, they briefly mentioned that, his 5-day work week.
Mm-hmm. So I couldn't find, I didn't look it up, but I didn't really look up what was the norm at the time, but I wanted to just at least put a shout out to George for, kind of creating the work-life balance that we have now, even though it was 55 hours a week, and they called like half holiday Saturdays. So they're working more than we are kind of known to do now, but he kind of started that. And I think he did like paid vacations, which they didn't really do then. And so basically PTO.
Nice.
And paid his employers like better wages than other places. So they never had like a strike because everyone respected him.
Thomas Edison was the patent holder of direct current DC and the inventor of the first commercially viable incandescent light bulb. His goal was to bring electricity and in turn light to the masses. However, direct current had its limitations, including losing energy when it was transmitted over long distances. DC plants had to be within a mile of customers. Therefore, DC current worked best in cities. Edison hired Serbian-American mathematician and engineer Nikola Tesla to help him perfect direct current. However, Tesla developed an idea for a better system that utilized alternating current, AC, which could power large areas by switching or alternating the flow of charge along the way. As the U.S. Department of Energy explains, direct current runs continually in a single direction, like in a battery or a fuel cell, while alternating current reverses direction a certain number of times per second, 60 in the US, and can be converted to different voltages relatively easily using a transformer. Edison wasn't interested in Tesla's system, initially dismissing the idea of alternating current, describing it as splendid but utterly impractical. He also didn't want to lose the royalties he was receiving from his direct current patents on the systems his company had already installed. He refused to pay Tesla what they agreed upon, and the two parted ways. George Westinghouse, who was in charge of the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company and made a name for himself by inventing a revolutionary railway air brake system, saw the potential of AC electricity and eventually hired Tesla and bought his patents for AC power. He began installing it everywhere that he could, at first focusing on areas unreachable by Edison's DC current. Westinghouse's feud with Edison intensified when Westinghouse brought AC power to large cities like New Orleans, even losing money at times in order to undercut his rival. Towards the end, Edison's push for DC had started to fizzle, which they don't really show. It kind of just concludes at the big Chicago World's Fair. His push started to fizzle in the face of dwindling profits. He had merged with Thomson Houston in 1892 to become General Electric, or GE, which was a more AC-friendly company. Edison began to put his focus into other projects, backing off his campaign to destroy the reputation of Westinghouse's AC current. In 1893, Westinghouse won the contract to bring power and in turn light to the Chicago's World Fair. A current war fact reveals that his bid of $399,000 to use the Tesla-designed alternating current system to power the fair beat out General Electric's bid of $554,000 to use Edison's direct current system, which, man, I should have converted that into today's money. Either way, it's a lot of money. For the 1800s. The fair would prove to be a mesmerizing showcase for Westinghouse's alternating current system. The public began to view electricity as not just a luxury anymore. So they very, very briefly show this at the end. But when the plant at Niagara Falls started delivering AC current all the way to Buffalo, New York, 26 miles away, the achievement marked the unofficial end to the war of currents. Westinghouse's AC current became the standard in the electric power industry. And as for today, although most items around us are powered by AC current, some items like computers, solar cells, LEDs, and electric vehicles, like I have, all run on DC power.
Whoa, that's weird. So Tesla car runs on DC when the guy Tesla helped create AC? What?
That's what my research says.
What? That's just funny.
Yeah, that's pretty silly. So DC has seen a bit of a renaissance in recent years. The stability of direct current has allowed companies to discover ways to use high voltage direct current, HVDC, to transport electricity farther distances without losing as much power along the way.
So can you repeat all of that, but like as if you're talking to a 5-year-old?
I know, right? I tried to simplify it.
This is just too much for my little small brain to handle.
Yeah, I feel like they did their best to explain in the movie. Like they kind of showed so they had the map going the whole time with the bulbs of them taking over each city or whatever. So they had at one point, they showed the map and they showed all of the little not powerhouses, but because Edison wanted DC and like I said, it doesn't go as far, they had to have more power plants. So they kind of showed that in like this little diagram, like this little cut to diagram where there's like, here's all the power plants you would have to use to do DC and you'd have to bury the copper wire. Instead, let's use AC, which can go further. You can have bigger, less power plants and then have the lines go overhead, which I love that scene when Tesla shows up to, I think it's Chicago, and you can just see above him all of the power lines. Like, that's just crazy. Power lines are, I don't know. My mom has very strong opinions on power lines. I'm glad they scaled back the operations and, have figured out how to run it in fewer power lines. Because, God, can you imagine if cities looked like that with hundreds of wires above head? Jeez Louise.
I'm sure it looked like that at one point.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Can you imagine if it still looked that way and they hadn't figured it out? Like, it's just like, ugh.
Let's talk about the man himself.
Yeah, let's dive deep into Edison
here. Oh boy.
Man, I now despise.
It's funny because I don't say too much. I'm not that mean about him.
That's surprising.
So in the film, in my opinion, they did show Thomas Edison to be ruthless, to be not a complete jerk, but not a great person either. It was kind of just showing how he will like do anything to get where he wants. I
was gonna say, it's like he had his eye on the prize and he did not care how he got there as long as he got there.
But they try to show the softer side with like his reaction to his wife, being sick and just trying, what I mean? They did show kind of a softer side too. So in a Forbes article from 2018, I found this. Throughout his life, he struggled socially, his lack of charm and gruff manner resulting in having a few close friends. In short, the real reason he developed a habit of locking himself away in his lab was that he couldn't stand interacting with most other people. So to me,
now I get it.
Yeah, exactly.
He just hated people.
He didn't. Yeah, he's already socially awkward, and I think he just didn't get along with people. And I think what they made it sound like is just that he couldn't really understand social cues. So if somebody's saying something, he reacts in a certain way. He's gonna come off as a jerk, but really he just didn't understand that you're approaching him in this way. In another article I found, modern-day sources often make Edison out to be a ruthless individual with a moral compass that is always pointing south. But in life, in general, it's always more complicated than that. Thomas Edison was an inventor, a businessman, and he had his faults, just like everyone else. But he was not an evil villain cackling and conspiring to destroy others. Like many men, he was competitive, but there's no evidence of him trying to destroy Tesla's career. And some historians believe his crusade against AC was, to an extent, a genuine belief that it was not entirely safe for people to use. This is not that hard to believe, as Edison believed greatly in creating safety switches and the like to go along with his electronic apparatus, and he was very concerned if any of his researchers became sick while experimenting. Nowhere was that more apparent than Clarence Daly. Daly and Edison both worked on X-ray studies and the effects of radium and polonium. The exposure was so bad that Daly ended up losing both his arms, and he suffered for nearly 8 years before he finally died from radiation poisoning. Edison was greatly upset by all of this, and it affected his thinking for the rest of his life. He would not go near radioactive materials and advised others against doing so. He also promised to take care of Daly and his family and keep him on payroll even when he could no longer work, because Edison felt so bad about what happened. That was despite the fact that Daly had entered into the experiment willingly and neither of them could have known the danger. Edison may not have been perfect and he may not have always been the best to his business rivals, but the man certainly had a heart.
Okay, fine. He's not terrible. But I know you're going to get into it, but I'm like, I feel like he was a little bit out to get Westinghouse and them and prove them, because they're his competitors and that's what his goal was, to always be on top. So I think I don't know about that specific line, but
to me, he seems like a type A personality. And so when I Google type A, it says the hypothesis describes type A, an individual, as outgoing, ambitious, rigid, organized, highly status conscious, impatient, anxious, proactive, and concerned with time management. People with type A personalities are often high achieving workaholics. And to me, that kind of describes Edison and kind of why he might be really ruthless when it came to his competitors, because he's just competitive. And again, he doesn't have any social skills, so he didn't really care too much about the consequences.
Doesn't hide it as well.
Exactly. One place where we could really call him a real jerk is he wasn't really a family man. So in a Vice article, they described him as Edison was a hard-to-please father and neglectful husband. When his sons attempted to follow his technological footsteps, the elder Edison would harshly criticize them for their failures. Thomas Sr. once called Thomas Jr. absolutely illiterate scientifically and otherwise. Like
Damn.
many other, yeah. Like many of history's great men, he was always in the laboratory, frequently forgetting anniversaries and birthdays. And although another son, William, studied at Yale, served in the World War I, and invented new versions of spark plugs, Edison repeatedly told him that he brought the blush of shame to his cheek. The two kids, right, they showed in the movie Dot and Dash. The son, that kind of who they were talking about, he actually had a lot of issues. I think he was an alcoholic or something like that. So
he seemed like the black sheep when I was because the fact that they only showed 2 kids when in reality they had 3 kids with that wife that they portray in the movie, and then he went on to have 6 kids. I was like, oh my god, what are all these kids doing? And like Dash for sure was like the disappointment and such. But I was gonna say real quick that I love that scene, just speaking on the fact that he loved being in the factory and isn't spending time with his family, when the wife brings the 2 kids and she's like, say what we rehearsed.
Oh my god, yes. And when that happened, I was like,
I was like, damn.
Yeah, so not a great guy, not a bad guy. Kind of
head focuses elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Complex fella, really. All right, what did he invent? Well, I'm not gonna get it.
Break all down 1,000 patents for us.
Well, okay, so this is what I put down. As Alec has said, he has 1,093 patents in the United States, and he has 512 worldwide. I'm not going to go through everything, but what I've listed and kind of maybe what we still kind of use today, the phonograph, the world's first method of recording voice and playing it back, the carbon microphone. He helped create that so that we can use the telephone. The incandescent light bulb. Ta-da! The Brockton breakthrough, which is basically the first 3-wire electrical power plants. The kinetoscope, the kinetograph, and kinetophone, which is kind of what they used for motion picture. So all 3 of them are needed to kind of watch and record and also play back sound.
I would say it's very much the precursor to motion pictures. I wouldn't say he's I don't know. I felt like they gave him more credit for that in the movie than what he really deserved.
I think in something I found online too, it said kind of the same thing that you just said, Alec, how it's like he created things that I guess helped people.
Yeah, it was like the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes. The nickel iron battery. So basically the alkaline batteries that we put in our smoke detectors. The cement used to construct Yankee Stadium, and a way to preserve fresh fruit. Like we were all
very
saying,
random all over the
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's just like they just think about daily problems, and it's just like, all right, how am I going to fix that? Like, it's just crazy.
Again, he was locked away in his room all the time, so he had a lot of time to think and go through that. But as we were all saying, many, pretty much all of these, it's not something he single-handedly invented. It's very much, maybe he had an idea about something and then he had his team work on it, and then he wasn't basically just the mastermind behind, I think, a lot of it. Because even with the light bulb, I know that the people who really originally created it, they did applaud him to be able to kind of take it to where it is, where he brought it to. You know?
They sold the patent to him. So, I mean, they had to.
They had the idea and he
improved.
Yeah. So it's really, I mean, it's just kind of hard to say what did he actually one day was like, I need this. I put the work in to get it to start working, and then now I'm at the very end and I got the patent for it, and now I have the name to it's honestly, I think maybe his very, very first invention when he was at home playing with chemicals. Read about that, but yeah, then he probably had some to do with it, but really these are kind of what he has his name on and what he's most famous for.
That's kind of interesting too. I didn't really think about it before right now for some reason, but how the inventors like Edison, how he had a staff basically of other inventors to help him work on these patents or whatever. I'm like, how does it work out that he has these people, but he's the one who gets the credit for whatever it is that was invented?
I think of it kind of as Mark Zuckerberg. We know him as kind of the creator of Facebook, but
he
really
had people working on it with him.
Yeah, he created,
That's
maybe
true.
he had like the first version, right? Where he created, I think they kind of showed it even in the movie. He kind of created a site, but to get it to the point and how it got so relevant today, he had a team do it. But we all think of Mark as the guy who like created it.
And I would assume because, I mean, as they showed multiple times in the movie, that Edison was like such a celebrity. I feel like there's probably some aspect of, oh, well, I don't want to just work with Edison more than I care about getting, I guess, the notoriety. I don't know.
And Edison was a businessman, so he was able to kind of get the funding for a lot of these things as well.
Can I just say real quick how sad it was when his wife passed and he kept listening to the recording of her voice? That was so sad. It was like the one time that I actually felt bad for him because it's just, here's this thing that he invented and I was using it to like, he's like really the only, I mean, at that time, it seemed like he was the only one who had like the luxury of like doing that. And it's just like, it's just so sad.
Yeah.
And they even mentioned it too. They were like, this invention's so great because you can play back the voices of your loved ones. And I was like, he does do that. All right, let's get on. Electrocution chair. As Alex said, Tesla worked for Edison and recommended the AC, but Edison rejected the idea. But later it kind of came up again and it shows that it can work. So then Edison felt threatened because the AC could distribute over long distances and be more economically friendly than DC. Edison launched a propaganda campaign to discredit the AC and convince the public it was dangerous. As a part of this campaign, animals were publicly electrocuted with AC when the New York State sought more humane alternatives to hanging at their death penalty prisoners. Edison, once an opponent of the capital punishment, recommended AC-powered electrocution as the fastest and deadliest option.
And side note that I mean, technically both of them are dangerous. It's just the fact that it's in different amounts. So when he was doing the testing, I don't know if you'll say this, but when he was doing the testing, he tried DC on a dog and then AC on a dog. And it's just, I guess, the amount of power the power that it takes to actually kill the animal is the difference.
I didn't put this in. This is just kind of like what I read really briefly. There is like a story about an elephant that got electrocuted because they killed. Okay, first of all, it was fucked up. He killed three people, and one of them was a trainer who tried to give him a freaking lit cigarette. It's like, okay.
Yeah, it's like, well, first of all.
Yeah, exactly. But when they electrocuted him, I guess they put like copper on somewhere on the elephant. Oh, they fed him a poisonous carrot so that, just in case, just to make sure he really dies. So, and it was but they also say that it wasn't something that Edison kind of like, it wasn't an Edison display. He wasn't even there. It was mostly like Edison supporters kind of doing this. But to go into the electric chair, in 1881, a story came out about a drunken dock worker dying after he grabbed a large electric dynamo. This led to New York dentist Alfred P. Southwick to dive deeper. He worked with a local physician, George E. Fell, and started to electrocute hundreds of stray dogs to come up with a method to euthanize animals via electricity. Southwick's 1882 and 1883 articles on how electrocution could be a replacement for hanging using a restraint similar to the dental chair caught the attention of New York State politicians who were following a series of botched hangings were desperately seeking an alternative. In 1886, commission appointed by the New York governor David B. Hill, which included Southwick, recommended that the 1888 executions would be carried out by electricity using the electric chair. Just FYI, because Edison didn't like come up with it. It's just like kind of an interesting little way. But because of this, now going into that, they had to seek like expert advice. They had to go and make their research, make sure this can be done. How are they going to do it? That's where Edison gets involved, because they go to him and they're like, hey, what is your recommendation? You're the expert here. We all know that. And he disagreed with everything because obviously at the time he was super against the death penalty, but they kept pushing and pushing and pushing. So in December 1887, he sent a letter to Southwick, and Edison stated that it would be best to use current generated by alternating machines, manufactured principally in this country by George Westinghouse. So they think that this kind of started the War of the Current. And soon after the execution by electricity bill passed in June 1888, Edison was asked by a New York government official what means would be the best way to implement the state's new form of execution. And he said, hire your criminals as linemen to the New York electric lighting companies. And that was his tongue-to-cheek answer. Now, let's go to the media war. I'm going to try really hard to keep this like on topic because it can go all over the place really quickly. So as we kind of said, Thomas Edison is a socially awkward person, or that's how I describe him. And how he kind of would work around this is that he would provide leads to the media and use it for him versus against him. So, for example, in the wake of the release of the phonograph prototype, an associate of his pretended to confide to a reporter that his average workday was 18 hours long. Edison installed a time clock in his laboratory and made sure that the press saw the inhumane hours he clocked. And when he went on his honeymoon with his second wife, he made sure the press got word that halfway through his trip that he had just developed the initial design for an automatic cotton picking machine. So he just, whenever he could, he would run with the press. And he was pretty strategic about it. But I noticed that the others weren't. Obviously, Nikola Tesla was much more private, and George Westinghouse would kind of just mostly respond to things versus like utilizing the press like how Edison would. For another example is how Edison would electrocute animals and Westinghouse didn't. In the War of the Currents, it definitely started with Harold Brown, an electrical engineer. He had no connection with the Edison company, but on June 5th, 1888, he sent a letter to an editor of the New York Post claiming the root of the problem was the AC system being used. Brown argued that the AC system was inherently dangerous and damnable, and asked why the public must submit to constant danger from sudden death, just so utilities could use a cheaper AC system. At the beginning of the attacks on AC, Westinghouse, in a June 7, 1888 letter, tried to defuse the situation. He invited Edison to visit him in Pittsburgh and said, I believe there has been a systemic attack in the part of some people to do a great deal of mischief and create a great difference between the Edison Company and the Westinghouse Electric Company, when there ought to be an entirely different conditions of affair. Edison thanked him but said, my laboratory work consumes my whole life. It's unclear what's the relationship between Brown and Edison. Some people thought that Brown was a puppet hired by Edison, and some say that they didn't get along. Thomas Edison himself sent a letter to the city government of Scranton, Pennsylvania, recommending Brown as an expert on dangers of AC. This is obviously to help further his claim that AC is hella dangerous. Through the fall of 1888, a battle of words with Brown specifically attacking Westinghouse continued to escalate. In November, George Westinghouse challenged Brown's assertions in the pages of the Electrical Engineer, and the Westinghouse AC systems caused 30 deaths. The magazine investigated the claim and found that only 2 deaths could be contributed to Westinghouse installations. So it's kind of funny how like Brown is just like attacking Westinghouse, and Edison's just like sitting back, like go right ahead. And Westinghouse is just trying to defend himself. But anyways, on December 13th, in the letter of the New York Times, Westinghouse spelled out where Brown's experiments were wrong and claimed that Brown was being employed by Edison's company. Brown's December 18th letter refuted the claims, and Brown even challenged Westinghouse to an electrical duel, with Brown agreeing to be shocked by an ever-increasing amount of DC power if Westinghouse submitted himself to the same amount of increasing AC power. First to quit loses. Westinghouse declined the offer. On August 25th, 1889, the New York Sun ran a story headlined, "For shame, Brown! Disgraceful facts about the electric killing scheme. Queer work for state's expert, paid by one electric company to inquire another." The story was based on 45 letters stolen from Brown's office and spelled out Brown's collusion with Thomas Hudson and Edison Electric. The majority of the letters were correspondence between Brown and Thomas Hudson on the topic of acquiring the 3 Westinghouse generators for the state of New York, as well as using one of them in an efficiency test. They also showed that Brown had received $5,000 from Edison Electric to purchase the surplus Westinghouse generators from Thomas Hudson. Further, Edison's involvement was contained in letters from Edison Edison's treasurer Hastings asking Brown to send anti-AC pamphlets to all the legislators in the New York state of Missouri. Brown requesting that a letter of recommendation from Thomas Edison to be sent to Scranton, PA, as well as Edison and Arthur Kenley coaching Brown in his upcoming testament in the Kelmer appeal trial. Brown was not slowed down by the revelation and the characterization of his efforts, and he continued to expose Westinghouse. And he says it goes like going after a grocer who sells poison and calls it sugar. It doesn't stop there. There was an electric wire panic. In 1889, there was a round of deaths attributed to the alternating currents. On October 11th, 1889, John Feeks, a Western Union lineman who was electrocuted while working on AC wires. Okay, I won't go into details of how he died because it's really, really sad, and it's going to be like a paragraph long. And basically, while he was working, he thought it was like low currents. Is that how you say it? It was like
voltage.
Yeah, low voltage currents. So he grabbed one, electrocuted, died, burned, was on the wires. Yeah, really gruesome. Thousands of people witnessed it, and it lasted about an hour. With his public death, it sparked a new round of people fearing the electric lines over their heads and calling it the electric wire panic. The blame seemed to mostly be on Westinghouse, since Westinghouse has bought many of the lighting companies involved. People assumed John's death was the fault of Westinghouse, one of his companies, Westinghouse's companies. Newspapers joined to the public outcry following John's death and pointed out men's lives were cheaper to this monopoly than insulated wires, calling the executives of AC companies to be charged with manslaughter. Harold Brown's reputation was rehabilitated overnight, with newspapers and magazines seeking his opinions and reporters following him around New York City. Edison was not quiet. Edison got involved. He wrote an article, talked some shit. He stated that the only way to make AC safe was to limit its voltage, and vowed that Edison Electric would never adopt AC as long as he was in charge. George Westinghouse was suddenly put in the role as a villain and trying to defend the pole-mounted AC installations that he knew were unsafe, and fumbled at reporters questioning, trying to point out all the other things at large in the city that were also dangerous. The next month, he did a better job with his response printed in the North American Review, pointing out that his AC transformer system actually used lower household voltage than the Edison DC system. He also pointed out 87 deaths in 1 year caused by streetcars and gaslighting versus the 5 accidental electrocutions and no in-home deaths attributed to AC current. Finally, it mostly just ended and fizzled out because, as Alec has said, the War of the Currents basically just died out with Edison leaving Edison Electric.
I know, it's kind of interesting when they had Tom Holland's character in Soul when he went to go do the presentation for the committee for the World's Fair, and like the last thing they ask him is, well, are you saying that your system is also dangerous? And it's just like which is kind of, like I said earlier, it's what Edison said, where it's just like they're both dangerous. It just depends on whose hands the system is in, kind of a thing. So it's just like, I don't know, it's mismanagement, mishandling, which makes it dangerous.
Yeah, but he also kind of like ruined it on himself because he was putting it out there how dangerous AC was. You know, if he never did that, I think the public, fear of it wouldn't be such a high or extreme.
Oh, also, I was going to say earlier, that was kind of funny. The line when JP Morgan is telling Edison that he's essentially being let go, and speaks to his personality again. He always, he wants his name on everything so that he, his name lives on. And he's like, well, what are you going to call it? What are you going to call the company? He's like, General Electric. I don't know. I can be an original too. I'll come up with something, and it's still called General Electric.
Okay, so let me go into more how the current war ended. I mean, like as you said, Lisa, it had to do with like the merge of the two companies and all that. But so at the end of the film, the plant at Niagara Falls was able to deliver AC current 26 miles away to Buffalo. That achievement seemed to mark the end of the War of the Currents between Westinghouse and Edison. Westinghouse's AC current system became the standard for electric. In history, this is accurate. This was also due to by Edison himself leaving the electric power business. Edison was becoming marginalized in his own company, having lost majority control in an 1889 merger that formed Edison General Electric. By 1889, Edison's Electric's own subsidiaries were lobbying to add AC power transmission to their systems, and in October 1890, Edison Machine Works began developing AC-based equipment. So with Thomas Edison no longer involved with Edison General Electric, the War of Currents came to a close with a financial merger. As like I was already saying, Edison President Henry Villard, who had engineered the merger that formed Edison General Electric, was continually working on the idea of merging that company with Thomas Houston or Westinghouse. He saw a real opportunity in 1891. The market was in a general downturn, causing cash shortages for all the companies concerned, and Villard was in talks with Thomas Houston, which was now Edison General Electric's biggest competitor. Edison hated the idea and tried to hold it off, but Villard thought his company, now winning its incandescent light patent lawsuits in the courts was in a position to dictate the terms of any merger. As a committee of financiers, which included J.P. Morgan, worked on the deal in early 1892, things went against Villard. In Morgan's view, Thomas Houston looked on the books to be the stronger of the two companies and engineered a behind-the-scenes deal announced on April 15, 1892, that put the management of Thomas and Houston in control of the new company, now called General Electric, dropping Edison's name. Thomas Edison was not aware of the deal until the day before it happened. The 15 electric companies that existed 5 years before had merged down to two, General Electric and Westinghouse. The War of Currents came to an end, and this merger of the Edison company, along with its lighting patents, and the Thomas Houston with its AC patents, created a company that controlled 3/4 of the U.S. electrical business. From this point on, General Electric and Westinghouse were both marketing alternating current systems. Edison put on a brave face, noting to the media how his stock had gained value in the deal, but privately he was bitter that his company and all his patents had been turned over to competition. I'm like, why do you, first of all, need two companies that are both doing the AC thing? Like, I don't really understand that.
It's a big country.
Just have a little thing about how all of these key players that we discussed are kind of remembered today. So today, Edison is remembered most for his electric light, his phonograph, and his work with motion pictures, which we already talked about, even though he didn't really have that much with I didn't even know anything about the motion picture thing until the movie, so that's why I was like, what?
I know, when I saw that, I was like, oh, are they just showing how many years have gone by? And then I was like, oh, yeah, that part.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think the phonograph thing is really cool. While Tesla is known for having made a great impact designing the alternating current AC electric system, I think he was most remembered for having created the Tesla coil, which when I say I think, I didn't even know anything really about that. So I'm like, okay, I'm learning something right now, looking up what they're remembered for. And so the Tesla coil is used in radio technology. And then finally, as I said before too, I didn't even know who Westinghouse was before this. So I was like, okay, what the hell is this dude known for? Because I have never heard
I've only heard of that name
before.
on headphones.
I feel like I've vaguely heard of the name, but I didn't know like anything about it. Few besides engineering and technological history buffs, which I thought was funny because you said if you don't know anything about electrical history, you probably don't know anything about it or couldn't follow the movie. But anyways, they're the ones who basically remember who Westinghouse is. Westinghouse remains a giant of the early years of industrial technology as the man behind key technologies in transportation and electrical power, which again, we've already discussed.
It's a big train
And
guy.
the work week.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the people and what they did. I think my only takeaway, like I said before too, from this whole thing is that I feel like Tesla was kind of wronged in the whole thing. Well, not even wronged, but I feel like the ending of his life was kind of very sad too.
It's so sad.
Yeah, and like he was like poor and alone, and I don't know what else, something else I think was going on with him. But I'm just like, dude, that's so sad, especially considering like the contributions he made, and he was never really, I don't think at any point in his life was he ever really like wealthy or anything like that, like Westinghouse or anything.
But wasn't some of it also his ego? Because I think somebody was saying how, or not somebody, but when I was reading it, it was saying how he didn't want to work for Edison anymore, and then he started, oh my god, I can't remember now, but it was just kind of like somebody described him also kind of having an ego of his own. And
I don't know if it was his ego more than just like, it's kind of the same with Edison where he just doesn't have the people skills type of a thing, because he was pretty more quiet than Edison, but like kind of neurotic too, and like was very calculated. and it just didn't, which they showed in the movie where he kind of was easily swindled because he just wasn't a businessman. He just didn't have that business mindset. He was here to invent things and figure things out. Like, he really needed somebody to handle that for him, and I don't think he ever had that for him. So yeah, like you're saying, it's just like he never was getting consistent money from any of his inventions or things that he worked on, and kind of died in obscurity.
Yeah, Westinghouse, I think, to me, came off as more so of a, like, he lacked the qualities that Edison didn't have, because Edison really was just focused on his goals, so he didn't care about anybody else, whereas Westinghouse did care. Like, clearly he cared about his employees, which is why he paid them fair wages and gave him PTO and things like that. He cared about the people around him.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things again where it's just like if they could have found a way to work together, it would have been a million times better.
I think, well, I mean, that's the thing. Westinghouse wanted to work with him, but Edison was like, nah, I can do this on my own.
Probably should have mentioned, I mean, I don't know. This is kind of semi-important, but they never met ever.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Unlike what was portrayed in the movie where I think they had met like twice or something in the movie. Yeah, they had actually never met in real life.
Yeah. It's like Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Internet Historians. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and give us a rating. And yeah, make sure you also follow us and subscribe to us on Instagram and YouTube. So next week, we'll be discussing Marie Curie from the movie Radioactive. So don't forget to tune in. Thanks again, and we will see you next week.
Goodbye.